need to talk about ideas, good ones and bad ones. We need to learn stuff about the world. We need an honest, intelligent, thought-provoking, and entertaining review of what the hell happened on this planet in the last 7 days. We need to sit back and listen to the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Yes, we're back, dear listener, for episode 465, I think. Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove. I'm Trevor, a.k.a. the Iron Fist. Above me on the screen, looking down, kind of in a Brady Bunch style, Joe the tech guy.
Evening all.
And Joe, I think Scott will be joining us shortly.
He did
promised
say
he would
tonight.
Yeah, so we'll see Scott enter the picture at some stage. So... well, it was a big, long one last week, wasn't it? Did anybody out there get through all 3 hours of it, or did you bail about 45 minutes into it?
Was it 3 hours? I thought it was 2.
Yeah, well, it got nearly to 2 hours 50, I think. So
Okay.
If you did, you're a true believer. Well done. Got a lot off my chest. Joe and I had an argument, which is always good. Discussion, spirited disagreement.
Yeah, spirited debate.
Yeah. So if you're in the chat room, say hello. Let me see if I can make sure I can see the chat. Yes, now I can. Your comments will appear on the screen. We'll do our best to incorporate them. Try not to commit any defamatory type of libelous action if you could, because it will necessarily include us, and we don't want to do that. So John's there, so he's a bit under the weather after a 10-day cruise. Okay. What's on the agenda? Well, what's on the agenda indeed? A little few messages from patrons. Going to deal with those first. Then the ceasefire in Gaza and what happened there in terms of its collapse, and then some Australian news, I think. And then we'll see how we go. I've got enough material again for another 3 hours, but Joe, I'm a little bit tired tonight.
Fair enough.
So I don't think I can go much beyond. We'll just see what we get through. And S West is in the chat room. Good on you. So yeah, a few little bits and pieces from the good old patrons. So Wayne is one of our patrons, and he provided a suggestion as to how we could cancel the AUKUS arrangement and do it in a way that would perhaps not cause us to pay any penalty and all the rest of it. So he suggested a letter from Anthony Albanese to Donald Trump, subject AUKUS agreement, a strategic opportunity for Australia. Dear Mr. Trump, I want to commend President Biden for securing the AUKUS deal, an incredible achievement for Australia. We're so grateful that you continue to support this amazing deal initiated by Biden. Your backing of these initiatives is appreciated, and thank you for your ongoing support of AUKUS. Best regards, Anthony Albanese. I think Wayne's on to something there, Joe.
I suspect it might well work.
Yeah, that's a good one, Wayne. I like that. So that's a good way to exit from AUKUS without having to be nasty about it. So yeah, so that was that one. And
But will we get our 500 million US back?
No, but provided we don't get sued for 368 billion is what we really want to avoid. Patron Danny says, pass along my thanks to Joe the tech guy for recommending Leopards Ate My Face subreddit. The Schadenfreude really cheers me up after watching the news. So there you go. Thank you from Danny for you, Joe. Noisy Andrew said, I think it's highly unlikely Putin will invade anyone else unless, like Ukraine, the USA provokes it. And yes, any peace deal is better than no deal. Yes, Putin may rearm, but so can everyone else, which is probably way cheaper than keeping the current war going. He says also for 10 plus years I had Russian neighbours. Vlad was actually his name, the Russian neighbour. Always used to comment, in Moscow we knew we were being covered in government propaganda and shrugged our shoulders at it. But you Aussies believe everything you read regardless of how much sense it makes. Maybe I should have read that in a Russian accent, Joe. In Moscow, we knew... No, that sounds more Chinese. I can't do it. Anyway. Thank you, Noisy Andrew, for that feedback.
I suspect that would be deemed almost as bad as blackface these days.
Yes, it probably is, yeah. Patron, Brett Jones joined as a silver patron. Thank you, Brett. Much appreciated. And my brother Glenn upgraded to a gold. Fantastic. Thank you, Glenn. So, yeah, if you'd like to be a patron, look at the show notes, click on the link. It helps. Right, Joe. Israel-Gaza and the ceasefire deal that collapsed. Had you kept tabs on this at all, and had you discerned toings and froings of this at all?
I have seen the headlines. I saw that I can't remember what the Israelis claimed was the breach, but they fired a bunch of rockets back into Gaza. And I did notice some comments about the passivity of the headlines. Not saying, oh, that was right. It was that these rocket attacks threatened to break the ceasefire.
Yes. We'll get on to that. We will. So let's just... This is terrible, dear listener. The Israel-Gaza genocide is reaching its final stage where they're now just going to wipe out the Palestinians that remain and tell them you either leave or we are killing you. And they've more or less said that. So a guy, Tom Cody, on Twitter kind of summed it up, I think, which seems to me fairly accurate from my reading. And it's like this. Phase 1 of the ceasefire started on January 19th, a 6-week deal aimed at halting the fighting, swapping hostages and prisoners, and boosting humanitarian aid to Gaza. Reports indicate Hamas largely met its Phase 1 obligations. It released 33 Israeli hostages, some alive, some dead, including women, elderly and others, as agreed, while Israel freed hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Numbers vary, but it seems from 620 to 2,000. Aid flowed into Gaza and Israel began a partial withdrawal from populated areas, though disputes lingered over the extent and pace. So the ceasefire hit a snag when Phase 1 expired on the 1st of March. Hamas rejected Israel's push to just simply extend Phase 1, insisting that it had to move the process into Phase 2, which promised a permanent ceasefire and a full Israeli withdrawal. And these are steps which Israel resisted, without Hamas disarming and ceding control of Gaza. Hamas accused Israel of stalling on aid protocols, blocking infrastructure repairs, not fully withdrawing from key zones. Israel, meanwhile, claimed Hamas violated terms by delaying hostage releases and not negotiating Phase 2 in good faith. And the breaking point came when Hamas refused the extension of Phase 1. Israel halted aid on the 2nd of March, citing Hamas's rejection. Tensions escalated. And on March 18th, Israel launched surprise airstrikes, killing over 400 Palestinians, effectively ending the truce. Like just in the middle of the goddamn, I think it was night, just launched an airstrike. And if you are on media sources like Twitter and places like that show the devastation, you just see these heartbreaking pictures and images, dear listener, of a lot of women and children were killed in these airstrikes. And you just have these scenes of poor parents clutching their dead children and just bodies of children lying mangled everywhere. Anybody who's ever loved a little child should feel heartbroken over the scenes, and that's what's going on. So anyway, I think I've got a clip here. Now this is a British foreign minister. Let me just get this straight. Who we've got here? Bear with me a second. British chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Dame Emily Thornberry MP, so UK politician speaking, and I'll play a bit of what she had to say, which sort of explains it. So, okay. Oh, just got a message from Scott. His internet is stuffed, so not joining us. It's just you and me, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
All right, here we go.
Emily,
the
firstly,
phases.
what are your thoughts on the interview and what's happening in Gaza?
So I think that what the ambassador was failing to acknowledge is that the deal that was agreed was one that many people in the international community, including President Biden, felt was ready to go last summer. And first of all, there were grave doubts as to why it had taken so long for it to be implemented in January. It could have happened much earlier. Biden said that, and the rest of the community feel the same. And it happens in phases. And as you were trying to say, phase one is a kind of almost like the easy bit. You release hostages and we will release prisoners and there will be a ceasefire. And then we move to phase two. And phase two is Israeli withdrawal, but still more hostages and more prisoners being released. And, and also negotiations beginning for what will be the long-term future for Gaza. Now, what happened was that we got to the 1st of March and the Israelis unilaterally, as far as I can see, said, we're not going into phase two. We want to just stay on phase one. We want to just keep having more hostages and releasing prisoners. We're not prepared to talk about moving out of Gaza, nor are we prepared to talk about a future for Gaza. And the reason for that is because Netanyahu is clinging on to power by his fingernails. He has to pass a budget at the end of March, and he has to pass that budget in order to continue the government that he's in charge of. And if he isn't in charge of the government in Israel, he personally gets into a great deal of trouble. There are court cases swirling around him, there are inquiries and everything else. So what he wants to do is he wants to extend that period as long as he can, and so that he can keep in power. He then begins the bombing. I'm sorry to be quite as brutal as this, but I really can't see any other explanation for this. He begins the bombing. Ben-Gvir, who's pulled out of his government, comes back into the government again, so helping to shore up the government, helping to get his budget through. And in the meantime, 300 plus Palestinians are killed. And the war aims are not clear as to what it is that they're doing. Who is it that they're going after? They say they're still going after Hamas after all this time. But how is it, if they're going after Hamas in a way which is proportionate, that we get so many civilians that are killed? And that is the problem. And that is the problem.
Well, Joe, any dispute with that? Does it seems like it's the case?
Look, if you kill 500 civilians to get one Hamas member, it's worth it. That's proportionate, isn't it? There's a proportion.
That seems to be the Israeli calculation, that this is perfectly legitimate to just kill these people on the off chance that you might get a couple of Hamas fighters in amongst them. It's just incredible. I mean, these people just blow up hospitals now. You ever seen a hospital blowing up just for the fun of it? Here's one. Just a hospital standing there. Bam! The cancer hospital. Kaboom. Gone. Was there once, now gone. It's just incredible that these people can just
filming it.
So it might have actually. I think that was the Israelis filming it. Cause
I was going to say it sounded kind of jubilant.
Yes, because a lot of the stuff that's coming out of Gaza is, of course, filmed by Israelis because they don't recognise the moral depravity of what they've reduced to. Joe, there was a lot of them who were on the soldiers who were posting on their private social media pages their actions in Gaza, and a number of countries, I think Brazil in particular, started arresting Israeli soldiers who were on holidays in other countries using social media posts. And there's an organisation whose name escapes me, but they're basically trawling through the private social media, or the public social media pages of Israeli soldiers where they perform atrocities and start documenting who they are and what they've done, so that when these people go overseas on holidays, they get arrested. And so that's sort of a phenomenon that's happening where, sure, film the blowing up of a hospital because that's a good thing, and film other actions. They've lost all perspective of what's normal. Yeah. So what we've got is Defence Minister Katz He has, let me just, you're still there, Joe? Okay,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
a funny noise. Defence Minister Katz, this is a statement that the Israeli Defence Minister put out. Residents of Gaza, this is your final warning. The first Sinwar destroyed Gaza, and the second Sinwar will bring upon it total ruin. The Israeli Air Force's attack against Hamas terrorists was only the first step. What follows will be far harsher, and you will bear the full cost. Evacuation of the population from combat zones will soon resume. If all Israeli hostages are not released and Hamas is not kicked out of Gaza, Israel will act with force you have not known before. Take the advice of the US President, return the hostages and kick out Hamas, and new options will open up for you, including relocation to other parts of the world for those who choose. The alternative is destruction and total devastation. So,
Although some of them will be allowed to stay to work in the Trump Plaza.
well, as Arnaud Patron says, he's basically saying either comply with our unattainable demands, getting rid of Hamas, or we'll ethnically cleanse you. Or don't and face complete annihilation. I mean, what is the average Joe Blow citizen in Gaza? What capacity do they have to force Hamas to surrender and to hand over hostages? Doesn't matter. Like this barbarian is telling the residents of Gaza they're responsible, as if they have any capacity to force the things that he wants in any event.
But also he's setting himself up for Hamas to be even more popular.
Indeed, with everything they've done. So yeah, food kitchens have been forced to shut down. It's going to be a starvation and disease type phase that's going to happen, Joe. And Joe, what do we get in the mainstream papers about this? Fuck all. Like, this is going on and barely a peep out of any of them. Murdoch, a little bit in Guardian maybe, sometimes nothing on the ABC, just almost total silence on these things. It's just appalling. The main news items are whether people are using anti-Semitic tones in their writing if they criticise what Israel's done, more than the fact that hundreds of people are being blown up overnight, hospitals just bombed, destroyed. The big ticket item is, are you using the correct speech when you're describing these things? For fuck's sake.
And if you're criticising Zionism, that's just a code word for Jews.
Yes. More. We'll get onto that, Joe, a little bit later. More and more where they're openly saying Zionism is code word for Jews, so you're not allowed to, the distinction doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's something our universities have adopted, unfortunately. Chris Hedges lived and worked in the Middle East for years, spent a lot of time in Gaza, really, really good reporter. He wrote, it's the final blood-soaked push to drive the Palestinians from Gaza. No food, no medicine, no shelter, no clean water, no electricity. Israel is swiftly turning Gaza into a Dantesque cauldron of human misery.
Dante-esque.
Dante, yes, thank you. Where Palestinians are being killed in their hundreds and soon again in their thousands and tens of thousands, where they will be forced out never to return. And what comes next? They've ordered the evacuation of northern Gaza. What comes next is mass starvation. And the message is unequivocal. Gaza will be uninhabitable. Leave or die. And he writes a bit more there, but it's just, it confirms the sort of phases and the breach of the ceasefire that we've just discussed with other commentators. So just to sort of another...
Wasn't there something as well about a couple of the bodies that handed back that they were saying DNA testing confirmed it wasn't the people it was claimed to be?
I think there was something like that. You know, I think there was some either honest mistake or some evil mistake. But at this point,
Yeah.
mistakes over body parts or compared to everything else.
Yeah.
This is
No,
the
but
thing.
that was their excuse.
Yes, Israel's in uproar because of the identification of body parts. Meanwhile, they're just creating more body parts. I mean, you see awful images, dear listener, of children collecting the entrails, limbs, and just handfuls of flesh of their dead parents in buckets so they can give them some sort of burial. This is the sort of thing that children are doing. It's just completely unhinged. You know, what do our leaders say? What do our leaders say? Here's what Peter Dutton's got to say about stuff.
A Dutton coalition government will again put the national interest front and centre of our foreign policy. If I become Prime Minister, one of my first orders of business will be to call Prime Minister Netanyahu to build on the one-on-one meeting I had with him during my recent visit and to help rebuild the relationship Labor has trashed. Israel will be able to count.
Are we in some sort of dystopian alternate reality where a monster like Netanyahu and our wannabe alternative...
Come on. Dutton is not a monster. His wife says so.
With all this and Dutton's going, this Labor government has trashed our reputation with the wonderful state of Israel and in particular Netanyahu. My first order of business will be to restore that relationship. This is where the whole, if you had any doubts that we're being completely misled by mainstream media about what's going on in the world, about economics or the role of the USA or other things, you only have to look at this genocide and the omission of reporting and then the misrepresentation of what's happening and then the gaslighting by people like Dutton over what's happening to realise, holy shit, if they can do that over a genocide, what else are they doing about simple things like capitalism? Oh, God, Joe.
Well, we had this discussion about Luigi Mangione, didn't we?
Who was that guy? Who was that
The
one?
guy who killed the head of the health insurance in America.
Yes.
Where people were saying, how dare you make these mean jokes about this poor, hard-working father who was gunned down in the street. You know, what had he ever done to deserve this? And totally ignoring the fact that his policies had probably killed thousands of people.
Yeah. Yeah. There's just so much context missing from these conversations. So to sum it up, Caitlin Johnston, this is a broken civilization, a warped and twisted dystopia. The waking nightmare we are witnessing in Gaza is the result of everything that we have become as a society. Those dead and mutilated children on your screen are the fruit on the tree of the Western world. Now the Gaza Holocaust has been reignited and the people who rule over us are actively supporting this while working to imprison, fire, silence and deport anyone who opposes it. That's pretty much what's happening. So while that's happening, Joe, you know, on the Guardian website, it says it's got a section where you can look at what's the most viewed news items that people are clicking on the Guardian news site.
Yeah.
And then the ones that they most deeply read, like the ones that they spend the most time reading. Number 1, Formula 1, Piastri wins Chinese GP. Number 2, Peter Dutton's taxpayer-funded flight to a long lunch on Noosa River. Number 3, I was sexualised, patronised and ridiculed. How Charlotte Church survived the tabloids to become an earth mother. 4, Sydney socialite Vanessa Jacobs refused bail for allegedly assaulting police officer after car crash. 5, as trust in the US collapses, leaders in Australia and around the world are frantically recalibrating. Well, there's a good one. That's something people should be clicking on. 6, Trump administration is descending into authoritarianism. Good. 7, my adult daughter wants to turn herself back into a teenager. 8, Trump revokes security clearances for Biden, Harris and other political enemies. Number 9, Piastri winning the Chinese GP again. And number 10, Jin Chalmers about coalition at NDIS. Joe, if that wasn't worrying enough, when it talks about the most deeply read items on the Guardian news site, number 1, this is how we do it. She reminds me that sex is fun, not a test I'm going to fail.
It's important.
Yeah. Number 2, United pilot attacked passenger for taking too long in the bathroom. Lawsuit alleges. Number 3, the Sex Pistols rock London. Number 5, Gwyneth Paltrow. Intimacy coordinators make sex scenes safe for all, not just A-listers. It goes on. People are clicking on trivial things, and the stuff they're really reading intently have invariably something to do with sex, Joe. That's what. That's what gets
maybe
eyeballs.
the newspapers are their escapism from the horrors of their life.
Yeah. This podcast is supposed to be about news and politics, sex and religion.
Yeah.
Should be doing more sex to get more eyeballs.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's 8 people watching, and let me see. Don, he made it through the marathon. John finished watching the marathon, and he says the pod's better when Trev gets some well-informed pushback. That's you, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew's listening in the car. Timmy, unpopular thought experiment. Would the civilian deaths be reduced if we swap the military power of the belligerents? Would the civilian deaths be reduced?
So if Hamas was strong and Israel wasn't?
Yes. You know what? I reckon at this point in time, after everything that's happened, I think Hamas would kill as many people as they could to reclaim the land that they're trying to reclaim. So, yes, I think that would be what would happen, is there would be probably an equal level of destruction. Don't know. Don says Dutton's not a monster, he just looks like one. There we go. Okay, so that was that sort of stuff. Aussie news, Joe. Anti-Semitism. Let me get back to the Aussie news. Well, I put this on the list and it seems trivial, doesn't it? Opposition leader Peter Dutton reveals he's never drunk coffee in his life. Joe, that's enough to make him a monster in my view. Are you a coffee drinker?
No.
I had a feeling you wouldn't be. You can't trust. Can you trust somebody who doesn't drink coffee?
Probably not.
Yeah.
I have
There's an
my own
article.
vices.
There was an article in Crikey about Richard Marles, and what a hawkish character he is, and how he's totally sucked into American stuff. He's our defence minister.
Mm-hmm.
They've obviously got hold of some people with some inside knowledge of the working of Richard Marles in Parliament. His desk in his ministerial office opposite is a small bookshelf, which a government source labels as his shrine to America. There are US flags, photos of Marles stateside shaking hands with government officials, a Statue of Liberty figurine, assorted American memorabilia, US history books, lots of them. It's a tangible symbol of his regard, bordering on obsession for all things American and Uncle Sam. And unfortunately, Joe, he's in charge of our defence. And if anybody's going to cancel AUKUS, it would have to be him, presumably.
Does he have the Team America theme tune playing?
I think if he doesn't, he would want it to be.
Have you ever seen it?
No.
It's the South Park guys.
Oh,
Did a
okay. So maybe you wouldn't want
movie.
it. Okay.
It's a spoof. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
Totally without taste.
Okay. Odd. Going on, a less well-known aspect about Miles is he can be gullible. A minister with a science degree, he is normally forensic in his approach to his job, reading every departmental brief and interrogating information put to him, as defence officials know too well. But if he likes someone, his judgment can go missing. If he falls under the charm of someone's wealth, fame or power, he won't be talked down, a government source says. And it goes on to give different examples and stuff like that. So, but yeah, totally besotted with America. Unlikely to pull the pin on an AUKUS deal. Joe, if we're to get rid of AUKUS, I think somehow we have to get Miles out of his ministerial position.
He'll be crying otherwise.
And unfortunately, he's the head of the right-wing faction that Albanese's done a deal with, Albanese and the left, and so for factional reasons seems incredibly unlikely. So I don't know how we could... It's so obvious that now's the time, but anyway. Remember the Socialist Equality Party that we've had on a couple of times? So unfortunately for them, the Electoral Commission has ruled that their party name won't appear on the ballot in the upcoming federal election. Joe, when we were in the Secular Party, we needed 500 members.
That's gone to 1,500, hasn't it?
It's gone to 1,500. And I remember a great deal of time was taken by Anne Reid and people like that, Craig, I think, ringing every one of the 500 names that were on that form saying, if you get a call from the Electoral Commission, are you prepared to say you're a member of the Secular Party? Just confirming you think you're a member, and so you will say yes. And so that was done to make sure that when the Electoral Commission rang,
You also can't be a member of two parties, if I remember correctly.
Something like that. So anyway, apparently the Electoral Commission started ringing around to check that members of the Socialist Equality Party, and I think they got about 3 no's, and that was enough for the Commission to say, well, statistically it's unlikely you actually have 1,500 here, and therefore we're not going to register you. So they've appealed and blah, blah, blah. Might get them on at some stage because they're actually writing some interesting articles on their website about all sorts of topics, including Gaza. But the boys at the Socialist Equality Party won't be standing under that name in the coming election. They'll have to do it in their own names. So, yeah.
Well, I didn't think they particularly cared because they were waiting for a workers' revolution.
Yeah, well, I think they want their name there at the forefront. Yep. So, anyway, that was the story with them. For long-time listeners of the program, you will remember them. Joe, I'm a little bit worried about sharing the screen of the Essential Report, so I'm just going to run through a little bit of it just in front of me. But Essential Report polled some Australians. Enough Australians that you're within 2 or 3% statistically of what the actual number should be. Climate change acceptance. Do you believe there's a fairly conclusive evidence that climate change is happening and caused by human activity? Or do you believe the evidence is still not in and we may be witnessing a normal fluctuation in the Earth's climate that happens from time to time? So, is it caused by human activity, or is it just normal fluctuation that's always occurred?
It's a bit binary though, isn't it?
Well, there was a don't know option for people, I guess, Joe. But let me see. Overall, 54% say caused by human activity. 35% say no, normal fluctuation, and 11% don't know. If we're looking at gender,
more men don't believe.
Correct. Men, 49% say human activity, 41% say just normal fluctuations. Women, 58% say it's happening by human activity. Only 29 say it's normal fluctuations in the earth. And by age, Joe, guess what? Young people, 61% say it's happening caused by humans. 55 plus age group, 48% say
And
that.
by political party?
And by, yes, voting intention, guess what? The Greens, 75% say it's caused by human activity.
Worrying that it's less than 100% for the
Yes.
Greens, isn't it?
17% of Green supporters say that it's just normal fluctuation in the Earth's climate, which is interesting. Labor, 69% think it's caused by human activity. In the coalition and in the independents, a la Pauline Hanson, Clive Palmer, blah, 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 they're both on 41%. So yeah, significant proportion of the population refuses the science
For
consensus on
anyone
that
who's
one.
interested, UQ have an online course called Climate Change Denial 101, I think it is. It's fascinating. It talks about how we know the climate's changing, how we know it's caused by humans, and the psychology behind people denying it.
Yeah. So, I think there was one here. Support for removing working from home. Was that one? No, support for sending troops to Ukraine. Overall,
As peacekeepers or as...
to what extent do you support or oppose Australia sending troops to Ukraine to support them in their fight against Russia?
Oh, okay.
Joe? So not just as a peacekeeper,
No.
but to Ukraine to fight the Russians. Overall, 12% strongly support and 21% somewhat support. That's 33% think it's a goodish idea, with only 27% sort of neither support nor oppose. Gender-wise, it's very even.
Okay.
Surprisingly, very even gender-wise. Age-wise, it's very even as well, relatively, surprisingly. Like in the 18 to 34-year-olds, 15% strongly support. But in the 55 plus, only 11% strongly support. So the strongest age group support is the young 18 to 34-year-olds.
Give them a rifle and send them.
Jesus. Voting intention, it's pretty even again, surprisingly. Labor 12%, Coalition 14%, Greens 14%, Independent 10%. That's the strongly support the idea. For the somewhat support, Labor 26%, Coalition 20%, Greens 27%. It's the goddamn young ones and the Greens who are more in favour of this, Joe. Quite a surprising result.
Well, the right-wing press have been very heavy on their sucking up to Putin, so it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, I guess so, that the war in Ukraine is a bad one. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Tucker Carlson, a whole bunch of the leading figures of the US right.
Yes, been ridiculing the whole exercise.
Well, have been crawling up Putin's arse. Tucker Carlson went off and did his fawning interview, didn't he?
Oh,
That was a while back. But
yes.
yeah.
Yep. Just quickly, Julia's in the chat room. Good on you, Julia. Don's there. Okay, back to my notes. So Jackie Lambie has said we should threaten to close Pine Gap. Good on you, Jackie. This is in response to the US failing to be our friend anymore and levying increased tariffs on our aluminium and other stuff. She says, Pine Gap, they need it like no tomorrow. Just tell them we're going to switch it off in 7 days. Obviously, there's no loyalty and mateship left here. He's made that quite clear. don't play by their rules. They're certainly not playing by ours. They're showing that friendship doesn't matter anymore. So she was doing this on some morning program, and Karl Stefanovich gasped, "Who's going to come to rescue us?" Literally, that's his words. God's sake. You know, do you really think that America's going to
an
come?
isolationist America certainly isn't.
No. Where was I? The Greens, they want out. They say we should be making drones and missiles and getting out of AUKUS. Good on you, Greens. Although Caitlin Johnston warns us, we're at the most dangerous point in humanity's abusive relationship with the US unipolar domination. For the same reason, the most dangerous point in a battered wife's life is right when she's trying to escape. Might be something in that. Joe, just quickly back to definitions and manufactured anti-Semitism. So Australian universities have adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism, but they probably did it based on misleading data, specifically a survey that exaggerated the prevalence of anti-Semitism among Jewish students. So we've already had our federal government and New South Wales government passing laws hot on the heels of so-called anti-Semitic incidents of the caravan and graffiti, which turned out to be nothing to do with anti-Semitism. Now we've got universities changing the definition of anti-Semitism based on a survey which would seem to be misleading. So,
But it said that Jewish students were anti-Semitic.
what did?
Well, the text you just read out was based on Jewish students being anti-Semitic, was what it sounded like.
Specifically a survey that exaggerated the prevalence of anti-Semitism among Jewish students. I think that meant
Polling Jewish students for their viewpoints.
anti-Semitism suffered by Jewish students.
Yeah, okay.
That, Joe, was an AI summary of the article,
Right.
which is why its wording wasn't as good as it could have been. So, Universities Australia released a statement on racism, announced that its 39 members, including all 38 public universities in the country, would adopt a clear definition of anti-Semitism. We'll get onto that in a second. But it's all based on a survey. There was a bill, actually. Sorry. Liberal Senator Sarah Hanson tabled a bill calling for a commission of inquiry into the matter. It's about anti-Semitism on Australian campuses. And according to that bill, campus anti-Semitism had reached unprecedented levels. And the bill presented the alarming information that 64% of Jewish university students had experienced anti-Semitism on campus. So that's what the bill was saying. And, Joe, that seems a high figure, doesn't it? 64% of Jewish university students had experienced anti-Semitism on campus. And that's drawn from a single source, a survey, Joe, commissioned by the Zionist Federation of Australia, an organisation whose stated purpose is advocating for the State of Israel on behalf of the Jewish community in Australia. The survey was conducted between 14th of March and the 3rd of April 2023, called the Jewish University Experience Survey. And potential respondents for the survey were solicited in two ways. Firstly, the SRC, Social Research Centre, sent invitations to participate in the survey to contacts on the Australian Union of Jewish Students database. So So like its affiliate organisation, the ZFA, the Australian Union of Jewish Students subscribes to Zionist ideals and seeks to promote a positive image of Israel on campus. So it's a certain type of Jewish student that would join the Australian Union of Jewish Students, for starters. That's who the invitations were sent to. And 3,330 invitations were sent out, presumably to all of the Jewish students, yielding 563 surveys, a fairly poor response rate of 17%. Of the 563 respondents, 360 reported experiencing anti-Semitism. So they sent it out to 3,330. Only 17% responded. And it's of that 17% that they can get the figure that 64% say they experienced anti-Semitism. So
I'm sure if you polled evangelicals on campus as to whether they'd suffered prejudice because of their beliefs, they'd say yes too.
yeah, and they just ignore the people who don't even respond to the survey. So self-selected individuals. Essentially, only 7% of the potential cohort reported being subjected to anti-Semitism. So, Joe, just an example of how you have lies, damn lies, and statistics. And that's been used in a bill and presumably by these universities as a reason to change the definition of anti-Semitism. And Joe, they're adopting a definition, and here it is here, which on the face of it doesn't sound too bad. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. But the IHRA, which is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, in addition to that definition, gives examples of anti-Semitism. And the examples include drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're exactly analogous, but certainly they're heading in that direction.
And it's Israeli policy. Like if you want to comment on the policy of the Israeli government, it is quite separate to yes. But of course, Joe, Dreyfus and others are trying to say, if you're just referring to Zionism, you really code for anti-Semitism. The other examples they give, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming that the existence of the State of Israel is a racist endeavour. Well, what the State of Israel is doing appears to be a racist endeavour, it seems.
But hang on. The existence of the State of Israel is a racist endeavour, or the actions of the State of Israel?
Well,
because I would agree that if you claim that the State of Israel, the existence of the state is a racist endeavour, that's possibly anti-Semitic.
But it is a criticism of the State of Israel still, Joe.
Well, yeah.
What else does it say as an example here? There's a few others there. Anyway, that's the sort of broad definition that the universities have adopted, and in it they've said, as part of their explanation at the universities, substituting the word Zionist for Jew does not eliminate the possibility of speech being anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just doing a like for like, if you're going all those Zionists deserve to die, then yeah, I would say that's probably as hateful. Whereas if you're going, the state of Israel by its actions are disgusting, then I don't see a problem with that.
Good point, Joe. Yeah. So Francesca Albanese was talking about this. She's the UN rapporteur who's been dealing a lot with the Gaza issue. So she wasn't talking about it in relation to Australian universities. She was talking about it in relation to this International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance and their definition. And she was being interviewed on some program somewhere, and this is what she had to say.
On the International Court of Justice, they're currently hearing a case brought by South Africa that accuses Israel of committing genocide, which you mentioned earlier. And Ireland has joined that case.
Yes.
According to Israel has denied genocide, and according to the American Jewish Committee, Israel is not committing genocide. Their argument is that the destruction of any national, racial, ethnic or religious group that Israel says it's seeking the destruction of Hamas, a terror group that states its intent to destroy the State of Israel in its founding charter, and that Israel's campaign in Gaza is an act of self-defense. I simply put you that as the counterpoint.
Yeah, Gavin, but why do you quote the American Jewish Association? Why don't you quote the Israeli scholars, expert on genocide like Omar Bartov, Amos Goldberg, Lee Mordechai, Ras Sigal, and the list is long. Why do you quote the American Jewish Committee? Excuse me. I mean, why don't you quote, if you really have to bring some respectable arguments, quote someone who has not vested interests. So this is the point, because I'm really worried about what's happening in Ireland, because while all this is happening, Ireland is under pressure through the mafia-style techniques that pro-Israel groups have deployed against everyone to adopt the IHRA definition of antisemitism, which will prevent discussions like this. I come from Berlin, where I've been threatened, a UN special rapporteur, I've been threatened with arrest because of talking about the situation in Gaza. And the moment Ireland will adopt, as the government has announced, the IHRA definition of antisemitism, which eventually it's very contested and will conflate criticism of the state of Israel for what it does to the Palestinians and to others, because Israelis are not spared from this, with anti-Semitism. What I'm saying today will be considered anti-Semitic. So I really warn the Irish people to be aware of it. And why are you listening to the American Jewish Committee, whatever it is? Listen to the expert, listen to the scholars, the brilliant scholars.
I like Francesca.
Fair enough.
Unfortunate last name of Albanese.
Well,
But, yeah.
I'm guessing there's quite a few Italians with that name.
Yeah, probably. What else have we got here? So that was that. A little bit of Trump before we finish, Joe.
Do we have to?
Yes. The whole tariffs thing, Joe. One of the reasons I think why he concentrates on this and whatever is it's just something he can do without passing laws in Congress. Like, it's just one of the powers that...
Well, I also think it's something simple that he can grasp.
Yes. And it doesn't require a lot of hard work and teamwork and negotiating and getting things passed through. He can just sign a piece of paper and it's done. And so that's one of the reasons why he likes this whole sort of tariff war that he's struck up, because he can control it himself without having to negotiate with Congress. So
he doesn't negotiate with them anyway.
Yes.
He ignores them and ignores the courts.
Yes, that's it. And he had an interesting comment to make about the planes that they're selling to other countries. I'll just play a little bit about what he had to say about the quality of fighter jets that the US is going to sell to its allies, its friends, Joe.
Buy them also, and certain allies will be selling them, perhaps toned-down versions. We like to tone them down about 10%, which probably makes sense because someday maybe they're not our allies, right? But
the Allies get a toned down jet. About 10%. It's what we like to do. Because after all, they may not be our allies. Yeah. So.
I notice a lot of European countries are. One of the defence ministers apologised to his parliament for having bought F-35s, and a couple of others are rethinking their planned purchases of F-35s.
Right.
Looking at the Swedish Gripen.
Yep.
And I can't remember, probably the French fighter. And saying that they're seriously thinking, because even if the problem with the F-35s is they're such advanced planes that they need to be maintained by the US.
Right. Yep. Yeah.
So there is no possibility of being completely independent.
Gee, I reckon one of those subs might be in the same boat. Boom, boom, Joe.
Well,
so sophisticated, it has to be maintained.
Haven't we said that they were going to be maintained by the US, crewed by the US, and managed by the US or something? And we might be allowed to use them if the Americans didn't have anything pressing at the time.
Just for photo opportunities.
Yeah.
When we hand over the check.
Basically.
That's it. Yeah. So they've been bundling up, in particular, Venezuelan immigrants based on tattoos, it seems, deciding that they're gang members and sending them off to, I think, El Salvador, Joe, where El Salvador, they've contracted out their...
Oh, yeah, that dodgy jail.
Imprisoning people over there. And a federal judge apparently put out an order saying, stop, you're not allowed to do this. And basically Trump wants to impeach that judge. Yes. And even the Chief Justice saying, Chief Justice John Roberts has criticised President Trump for calling for the impeachment of a federal judge. But yeah, this separation of powers means nothing. Basically, the Americans are saying, well, that judge didn't win X percentage, a majority of votes at the previous election, so it's the people have spoken and they voted for Trump, and whatever Trump wants, that's what Trump gets. And it's outrageous that he's in any way preventing this from happening, and he should be impeached. And if he's not watching,
made their constitution, isn't it?
Yeah, if he doesn't watch out, he'll end up in one of those El Salvadorian jails with the Venezuelans. So yeah, a complete breakdown of the separation of powers. Golf, Joe. Remember how we laughed at the North Koreans for supposedly believing that the dear leader in a single round of golf scored 6 holes in one? Or something like that.
Yeah. I've heard similar stories of Trump.
And actually, dear listener, we found a guy who actually went to the golf course and spoke to the greenkeeper, who explained, no, that was a misunderstanding of the scoring system. He didn't, even for a man of his talents, he didn't score multiple holes in one. That was people misunderstanding the score of golf. But anyway, US President Donald Trump has claimed to have won yet another golf tournament, this time the club championship. Surprise, surprise, at one of his own courses. The Trump International in West Palm Beach. But is the 78-year-old as good a golfer as he says he is? ? Trump makes grandiose claims about his golfing ability all the time. In August 2023, he claimed that he had won the senior club championship at Trump National Bedminster with a 67, a score that only 3 of the world's best players beat just weeks prior at the Live Golf Tournament hosted at the same course. I think he and the North Korean leader have various things in common, including exaggerating their golfing ability.
Well, I think it's common knowledge that he cheats.
Yes, shamelessly.
Mm-hmm.
And if you point it out, you don't get invited back.
You've heard of a traveller recently who apparently claimed that she was pulled over entering the US. They demanded the code to her phone. They searched through her personal messages, saw that she had some anti-Trump comments, decided to deport her, but she couldn't book her own flights out. She was held incommunicado for several days before they put her on a plane out of the country. And a number of countries are now recommending that their citizens think twice before travelling to America.
Right. She was just an ordinary citizen,
Yep.
just on a fairly ordinary private social media account.
I think it was European. I can't remember which nationality.
Yeah.
Yeah, young, in her 20s, was not able to talk to the embassy.
Mm.
So, yeah.
These are the things you would expect from authoritarian regimes.
Well,
Joe.
exactly.
Mm. Have you travelled to the States much?
I've been once in the last 30 years.
Okay. When you entered, did you get a hard time from border security, like looking you up and down, and were they just rude and arrogant and just pricks about the whole thing?
Not compared to my trip to Tunisia, no.
Right. Okay. On the times I've been in America, they've just been the grumpiest border guards that just make you feel very unwelcome.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. What happened in Tunisia?
Well, I got grilled about whether I was a Jew.
You say no, but does a Zionist count?
No.
Really?
Why did they my foreskin?
What made them suspect? Was it on your passport? Was there something?
No. My surname is
I see. It's like
possibly
right. There we go.
Jewish enough. So
right. Okay. Joe Cohen. Just kidding.
So yeah, I got quizzed for. It wasn't a huge amount of time, but it was still concerning enough.
There you go. Right. There you go. All right, we're going to sign off soon. Don, Trump doesn't have a handicap. He is the handicap. John's off to bed. He's not feeling well. Another great pod. Thank you, John. Yeah, that's most of the comments, I think.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, Scott missed out because his internet wasn't working. Hopefully he'll be with us next week, and I might try and do something, a bit of a deep dive on something else rather than just rattling through the events of the week. See what we can come up with as something a little bit, try and have something a little bit different next week. So anyway, thanks for those in the chat room. We'll be back next week. Joe, after blowing his nose, will be ready to sign off as well. We'll